Woo-hoo-hoo. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Millennial Sales Podcast, coming at you October 6th, 2021. My voice is a little hoarse because, well, at the end of the quarter last week where we were grinding, and then was at a bachelor party in Austin, Texas, and now I'm back, and the head's fuzzy, the voice is scratchy, but we're powering through and we're getting this thing done. So I appreciate you coming back. This is where young salespeople learn the tools they need to be successful. Got a great episode today. Parker Ashley, my guy, he's the VP of American Sales over at Darktrace in the security world. He's been there for about 6 years, climbed through the ranks, entry-level sales to VP of sales. One of the fastest VP of sales trajectories that I've seen. One of the quickest that I've had on this podcast. I mean, dude is probably in his young 30s, racking that VP of sales title at a hot growing startup. So a lot of respect for him. We talked a little bit about his early grind of sales, but this is really all about personal finance in this episode, something that he and I are both passionate about. So we talk about a couple different levels, right? One, if you're just an SDR starting out, what do you need to know? What do you need to know when you're making 40, 50, 60 grand a year in that first job, how to budget, how to keep your costs low, what to do with some of that first money. Then you hit a second stage, right? You get to be an AE, you have 1 or 2 breakout years as an AE, and you take that 50 and you double it, you triple it, you quadruple it, whatever it might be, and you've got some real cash coming in. And what should you be doing with that cash? Investing, saving, spending on shit, a combination of all of them. We talk about that. And then we talk about, kind of like the 2.0, the next level stuff. Like, what is he investing in? Let me talk about crypto a little bit. We talk about, ETFs, talk about real estate. We get into a ton of different topics. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Before we get to the goods of that, let me do a quick shout out to our sponsor. So Postal.io, OG sponsor to this show. They help create meaningful experiences for your prospects and customers. So you can send them very personalized gifts to your customers, right? From the local brewery, the local florist, whatever it might be, right? Instead of just like the random Starbucks gift card. So they're doing some great and creative stuff. We just did a contest on LinkedIn the other day for the best gifts. We gave out 3 months free coffee subscription to Dale Dupree, who's going to come on this show. So we got some great stuff coming along. Hope you check them out. Give me a check out. The best place to find me is going to be on LinkedIn, Tom Alamo. I'm Tommy Tahoe everywhere else on the social media world. Without further ado, let's go straight into my conversation with Parker Ashley. Let's go. All right, Parker Ashley coming on the Millennial Sales Podcast. How are you, man?
Hey, Tom, I'm good. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both in the rush of Q3 as we speak. Couple weeks left. I think you got a big presentation you were talking about tomorrow. So we'll say as focused as we can on the topic at hand, knowing that I woke up in a sweat at 6 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. thinking about deals this morning. So that's where my headspace is.
You and me both, man.
Cool. So for everyone that has not checked out Parker or connected with him on LinkedIn, definitely do that. VP of Sales over at Darktrace, has climbed the ranks there. We did a great episode on the Pavilion podcast with a lot of his background. So I think if you want to get to know Parker as an individual, that's probably the best episode for you. We're here on specific business today, my friend. I had a post the other day citing the book, The Psychology of Money, which is a great book that I'd highly recommend folks check out. And really kind of as a call out that money is something that we don't talk about a lot. You don't learn it in school, most likely. And as salespeople, you're in one of the few jobs where your income is directly related or can be directly related to how well you perform at your job. And so there could be really vast, income levels you have depending on, are you a first year SDR versus you get into outside sales or sales management and start really crushing your number. Things can add up fast. So I want to go through a number of different things with you, Parker, on a topic that I think it sounds like you're very passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm happy to. I think this is a topic that For better or worse, I mean, I don't think is addressed as often as it needs to be, especially in high income roles. And I like to see that people are talking about it more openly ever since the challenges of last year. So I'm happy to dive in.
So let's start chronologically here. And let's start with, some tips for people that are, SDRs, let's say, the first few years coming out of college, first few years in sales. I imagine your OTE is, in the mid 5 figures at that point. I know coming out of school, mine was like $40,000, which living in Boston was, you weren't saving too much at that stage. Right. So I'd love to hear what your take is for someone like that's coming out of school, might have some college debt or student loans rather, making a pretty, not a huge amount of money coming out of school.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, unless you land some massive investment banking role, or, you're coming out of law school and you get with a big firm or something like that, most people early in their career are going to have, an entry-level salary. But I think what's really cool about sales in particular is, like you mentioned, you could kind of control it based on your input, right? You're not beholden to, I do well, and then I'll get a 5 or 10% raise at the end of the year or whatever it is. And then I just keep doing that year over year over year. You can accelerate much more quickly based on meritocracy in sales. And I think if you're really, unless you're, hyper interested in one direction, and in marketing or whatever the case is, sales is just such an awesome career. I mean, it's such a good skill set, but financially, it puts you in a position to get very far ahead, very quickly, so long as you build those foundational skills. So, I think you have to kind of overlook the short-term part of the sales growth. And like you said, when I was an SDR, man, I think I was at like 150+% of my plan. I think I still made 60 grand, it's just kind of part of that early stage. But the upside is really interesting. And I remember when I was an SDR, I had a buddy who was an account manager at an IT firm. And I heard a whisper that he was making like 250, 300, 350K. He's my age. He just got out of the gate a little bit ahead of me. And at the time I was like, there's no way, man. Like I'm busting my butt and I'm making 60 grand a year. Like there's no way that money doesn't exist here. That doesn't exist. And then you find out about people making $1 million a year in the role. So the upside's definitely there. And I think you have to realize that and stay focused on it. But kind of think for that, more mid to long-term outcome in the role. Because the first few years, you're not going to get those big bucks, but if you build the foundation, you will quickly accelerate past your peers from an earnings perspective, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think patience is the name of the game early on, knowing that you're not going to get paid your worth at the beginning, right? You almost have to produce like someone that makes 100 grand, 150 grand before you actually get paid that, before you earn the promotion to be an AE or whatever it might be. I always feel like in my sales career, it always feels like your production can sometimes be ahead of where your earnings are. And so you just have to kind of wait for that to catch up sometimes, where you do earn the promotion, say that gets you to that new tier, or earn, the extra accelerator or whatever it might be. So definitely step one is patience, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, 100% patience and focusing on building the skill set that will become valuable, more valuable over time, exponentially, for sure. Yep. And I think you're about as valuable as the market deems you when you have no track record. But once you have the track record, you're paid whatever value that you could convince somebody else you have. And that's always based on the skills that you deliver. And in sales, it's much more tangible than that. I mean, you're based on your delivery. And if you have the skills to deliver big numbers and a lot of revenue for the business, then you're paid accordingly. And I think that's a big differentiator for sure.
Did you make any mistakes early on, and let's say maybe the first year or two in sales coming out of school that, you regret or that you would change now, or that are just like glaringly obvious to you now?
Yeah, I think I'd be remiss to say I didn't make a ton of mistakes. I think that'd be I think I'd be lying to myself. I've always That's not true. I don't think when I was growing up, I wasn't necessarily bad with money, but I was very instant gratification oriented, as most people are when they're younger. And I remember my first sales job was in high school. I was selling knives. I was selling Cutco knives. Yeah. And I remember I saw my first, yeah. I remember we talked about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, the opportunity there was awesome. That was the first time I recognized that my earnings could be tied directly to my effort. And I remember I got my first like decent sized check. It was my first check with a comment at the time, and I was in high school. And I probably went and spent it on like, I don't know, like some headphones or some speakers or something. I think probably a part for my car. I was big in my cars, but the money came in, the money would go right out. But I remember over time, like when I entered the professional working world and I was an SDR, and at first I was like, man, I'm going to earn, $60,000 or whatever it is. I was like, that's crazy. That's so much money. Like I could do so much with that money. Right.
Yeah.
And then I start realizing I'm in San Francisco at the time, which is a super cheap place to live.
Yeah.
And I remember this is the first realization I had where I recognized something was broken. Something was off. Because I'm making $60,000 a year. I'm living with my parents. I'm thinking like, God, man, I barely put away any money. I'm barely stacking away my chips, but I've got my colleagues who are living in the city. They're paying $2,500 a month or whatever it is, living with a roommate, but still paying almost all their base salary just on housing cost. They're in the red. They're talking about it openly. And they're asking me when I'm going to move to the city. And I'm thinking like, how can you afford this? Like, I don't understand. And I started to get kind of the sense then that like, okay, something's not right in this equation. But I still made mistakes. It didn't still lock in, right? Like, because I was still using all the money I got there. I wasn't able to save because I was like going to concerts and I was using all my money for those other things. Even though I was staying with my parents, I wasn't like using that strategically to save yet.
Yeah.
And then I got my job, my current job, and I became an AE. And for me, I'm big on putting yourself in a position to win. And the moment I recognized the opportunity I mentioned in sales, I wanted to be in that position or as close to it as possible. I wanted to get out of this SDR world or at least get into a higher earning position. So I did that. And then when I got my first like serious check, 5-figure check, I was like, dude, this is crazy. This is so much money. And then I went and bought a watch, or something ridiculous. Or I think I also bought a new car at the time. And to this day, I have not sold that watch or that car as a reminder that was the most costly long-term mistake I made at the time. And also I'm going to ride those things until they're worth nothing at this point. But it was very quickly after that where I started to kind of realize like how the system is broken and how hard it was for me to get ahead, even though I started to earn more. If just as much money goes out the door, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all how much I earn. So I think that was really eye-opening for me. Those were the last few big financial mistakes I made when I started getting those first few checks. And then I started just changing stuff. And I think that's what is super important for all new sales reps coming out there is you got to start thinking financially and how to get educated, because your money could go so much further for you if you're really diligent. Yeah.
So you get to that point, which is really kind of my warning on the post that led to this conversation was you can go from making that 50 grand to let's say 150 almost overnight. I mean, not like one day, but in a really short amount of time. You get promoted to AE, you have a few killer, months or quarters, and like all of a sudden your OTE, your take home earnings are, multiples of what they were the year before. And you're like, you could be 23, 24, 25 when this is happening, which is kind of crazy. You likely don't have a family at this point. You likely don't have a house, a mortgage, some of these high, responsibilities and bills that, people tend to have later in life. So my question to you is, okay, that happens. I'm noticing now I've got thousands of dollars more coming in every single month, maybe even $10,000 more every single month. What do I do with that? Is the move to save it? Is it to take a percentage, spend it on me, invest the rest? What would you suggest for someone that's starting to really see this money come in and doesn't want to blow it?
Yeah. And I think it really depends on everybody's unique situation. And, obviously I have to preface with, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't give financial advice or anything, but for me, I think a couple things to this. And the first point being, touching on what you mentioned about seeing more money come in the door. I think the challenge with, a lot of these high earning sales roles is that it's not just I have a $5,000 more a month coming in the door. Sometimes you get these huge pops in this bonus check. You get a 50 grand in a check or 100 grand in one check or whatever it is. And if you can't manage $10,000, you can't manage $100,000, right? It all applies. If you have no idea how to manage your money when you're earning $50,000 a year, you're not suddenly going to be better. If you have $1 million a year coming in the door, you're probably going to be worse because you're not going to understand your personal finance to a degree where you could control that money. And I think that's what's really dangerous. And it's actually almost weaved into a lot of the sales culture. When you're looking at spiffs and you're really great at sales and you go buy this nice car and listen, it's your money, spend it how you want to spend it. But I think we've built into this culture, and even what was the movie Glenn Ross, where he's talking about his car he's got out in the parking lot, and he's talking about his $90,000 watch and this thing. And we've kind of built this into the culture. You get this big check, you get to buy the Porsche or get to buy the Rolex or whatever. And I think that's really dangerous. So back to your question, again, how you manage it depends on your personal situation. You may have student loans or student debt, you may have credit card debt or whatever, or you may have other responsibilities that you need to take care of. But I think an underlying sort of notion is you want to start, especially when you're young, time is on your side. You have the advantage of starting to invest money when you're in your 20s is exponential than when you start to think about it from your 30s. And I haven't looked at the math on this in a while, but I think it's if you save $100 every month or something when you're when you're 20, you'd still be ahead of somebody who starts saving $500 a month when they're in their 30s or something crazy like that. So it's exponential. But I think you have to always look at it from the lens of paying yourself first. And I think if you think about it in that context, the game changes. And what I mean by that is I would pay myself first. So after the necessities, so after taxes and all that stuff. And as you get more sophisticated, there's actually ways to pay yourself before that. But, after you pay your necessity, your taxes and your Social Security and all that stuff, most people just go, okay, cool. I'm going to go pay my rent, my expenses, my bills, and then my spending money. And then whatever's left, I'm going to save that. You got to flip that completely on its head. You have to be so diligent about this money is for me. I'm putting this 10, 20% aside every month, no matter what. This is for me. This goes into a savings account, or better yet, and where it should be going is into investment account. Just go dump it into a Vanguard ETF or something that tracks a major index or whatever. Again, not financial advice. Do your own research, but just go put it into an investment account. But make sure that's the priority. And then whatever's left, you pay your necessities, your expenses, and then your wants. And that's how people should think about it. Because the earlier you start, the better it's going to be, because the end goal in order to build wealth is to get a substantial amount of money that works for you 24/7 And you then could have multiple strings of income that will secure you and your finances, your family well into the future, not just even retirement. You get to a certain point where you could retire earlier and earlier and earlier, or at least you have the safety net in the background to do whatever it is you want to do without being beholden to that check or that next big quarter or whatever it is. So I think that's at least the mental shift that you've got to make subtly.
Yeah. I mean, pay yourself first is maybe the best advice that you can give, right? You're paying your future self by setting aside that, whatever it is, let's call it 10%, 20%. And if you take that out, you can actually, for those that aren't aware or aren't doing this, you can actually, do this automatically ahead of time, right? So let's say you earn $5,000, you can actually take $1,000 that just gets automatically taken out of your paycheck and sent to, let's say, Vanguard or wherever you're going to put it, your savings account, whatever. And so when you get your paycheck or sent to your checking account, it's that $4,000, right? And so you don't even see that extra $1,000. It doesn't hurt. It's not a hole in your pocket. You probably won't even remember that you did that. But then one day you'll look and you'll see all the money that you've actually stacked up on the side.
Yeah, and that's the simplest thing, right? If your company offers a 401k or a retirement account or something like that, contribute to it, max it out if you can, or at least up to the match. And then it's done automatically for you. You don't have to think about it. If you're not diligent enough to do it yourself, at least take advantage of one of those programs. I think, all that, it's free money. That's also true. If your company has a match, that is free money. But at the very least, it's a discipline system that's built in for you. And I think that's just the start, to be honest. I think one thing that really helped me, so you start with that mentality. And at a certain point, once you start figuring some of these things out and you start really educating yourself financially, you start looking forward to making more money just so you could invest more of it. Once you see this engine start turning, if you're truly money motivated and you're interested in building real wealth for yourself and for your family and everything else, and you're genuinely interested in doing that, the moment you start kind of getting a little bit of that traction, and you start seeing the potential and you start figuring out these systems, oh man, you just become even more money motivated. But just because you're there's this investment I want to make, or this real estate I want to buy, or whatever, I want to fund these accounts and I need to make more money to do it. And then it starts being it starts becoming fun. It starts becoming a game that you could play. And then real quick to kind of back to your comment, I think the paying yourself first thing is important. But really where I would start for everybody is you've got to know your own situation. From the terms of your accounting, you've got to know your expenses. You've got to know what you have coming in. Obviously, you got to know what's going out the door and where. You have to understand to a T where your dollars are going. And you don't have to do this constantly and forever for the rest of your life, but you should spend an hour a week for a month or two, or maybe a couple of months, and just keep a simple spreadsheet and track your spending. Just figure out your burn rate. Figure out what it is you're spending. And that's a really easy place to start, because you'll start seeing Jesus, I spent $1,000 on restaurants this month. Why? That's crazy. That's so much money. And you don't have to cut out restaurants. You don't have to not have fun, but you quickly realize wow, I'm just bleeding money from areas I didn't recognize. And that's where you start. And that's where you find your first 10 or 20% that you save every month. And then for me, once I really got into this, I took it to a bit of an extreme.
Let's hear it.
But I started to see, okay, I knew my finances, right? And for me, financial freedom became the ultimate goal. I want to be able to have my investments pay for my expenses. And this is like the FIRE movement, the financial independence, retire early kind of stuff. This isn't retire on a yacht and all this stuff. This is just, I never want to have to worry about money and working, because I want to make sure that my money's working for me and covering my expenses. That was the foundation of it. Just that freedom was my why. I want the freedom to choose whatever I want to do, to walk away from whatever I want to walk away from, to take whatever job I want. If I want to, disappear and go circumnavigate the globe for 6 months? I can. It doesn't matter. I've got money coming in. That was my goal. That was always the why for me. So first it started with, what's my burn rate, right?
Mhm.
What's that freedom number? What's my expense number? Okay. It's, whatever it is, 50 grand a year. I'm a single guy, young, no family. So easy, 50 grand a year, 55 grand a year. Fine. Can I get that down? Where are my biggest expenses? Okay. Taxes. Biggest secret expense that people don't think about, right? Not a lot you could do when you're a W-2 earner, to be honest, on mitigating that. But taxes are a big one. Living expenses, next biggest one for most people. And then other necessities, and then your kind of extraneous stuff. But I quickly feel it's like, dude, I could, in my 20s, I don't need to have my own apartment in this big space in this luxury condo. Like, I don't need that. Like, is it really going to make me that much happier and more productive? No, I'm traveling for work anyway. I'm really rarely ever at home. I'm an extrovert. I like the company of people. So I kind of kept living, like an elevated college lifestyle in my 20s. That's the way I thought about it. I was like, I'll have a roommate. It doesn't matter to me. I'll have a roommate. That's easy. Save a bunch of money there. But start making those little transitions. And then I started to play a game with myself and see, like, how far can I stretch this? So start at 20% of everything that came in. I saved and invested. Then it was 30%. Then it was 40%. And what I would do is I would just turn the dial up slightly every month. Just see, okay, where can I save more? Where can I optimize? Where can I save more? And it was a little uncomfortable, but I didn't stop having a life. I was still going out with friends. I was still traveling. I was having a good time. And yeah, it helps when you're also focusing on the other end of the equation, which is your income. If you're making more money, it allows you to be more flexible with that money. But even still, I was not saying like, oh, I've earned, X% more this month so that I get to just spend that. I was like, no. I want to factor that into this equation. And eventually I got to the point where I was saving 50% of my base salary and 100% of my bonus.
Whoo.
I was
by bonus, you mean variable comp?
My variable comp.
Okay.
And I would take 5% from my commission to, get something I like or want. Something I could just spend and blow money on. And that was okay. That felt okay to me. But I got to the point, I think I was saving 85, 90% of my income at a certain stage. And at that certain stage, I was also earning a very high income because I was working the hardest I've ever worked. I was having a great couple of years. So it allowed me to do that. But I think even to this day, I'm still hovering somewhere around 60, 70%. And what that allowed me to do was take all of that money and just dump it into investments. And those investments started with your standard kind of equities, tracking ETFs on markets and just plugging it into stock and things like that. And then I dabbled with like crypto and I have a more focused strategy around that. Real estate's always been really big. I love the tax advantages of real estate. I love the cash flow element because again, the why was I want income coming in, and real estate allows you something that equities don't. You could use leverage. You could say you have $100,000, you could buy a $500,000 property with that. Yep. You could use $500,000 for the $100,000 you put in or whatever it is, plus the tax advantages, plus. So then real estate was a big piece. And I was like, okay, I don't really have the time to manage my own real estate, but then you earn a certain amount. Once you earn over 200 grand a year, you become a credit investor. So now you could start participating in syndications where people a lot smarter and more confident than myself put together big apartment deals, and they'll just take your money and they'll kick off a cash flow and then a big pop at the end. It's perfect. Just start shoving money in that. But that system, I remember when I left my SDR role, I was struggling to get to, I think like 10,000 in net worth. That was my goal. It's like, I'm going to get to 10,000. That's enough. I could travel the world if I want to, whatever naive thought I had at the time. But that 10,000 was the first goal. Once I got to 10,000, that 10,000 to 100,000 was equally as hard. Like that first 10,000 was so hard. I remember that being so hard. But once that 10 to 100 was like, that was hard. It was weirdly not as hard as I thought. It came faster than I thought. And then that first, 100 to 500 was like, there's a formula to this. And then you breach the million mark. And you're like, okay, now you're picking up serious momentum.
Right.
And I think once you see it, you just become addicted to it. And I think a lot of people don't realize, and the pandemic was very eye-opening for people who are living paycheck to paycheck or below their means, because suddenly they had a single source of income that was just shut off for many people, unfortunately. And they didn't have an emergency fund to fall back on, which is the first thing you should always build after you start paying down debt and things like that. They didn't have a secondary or tertiary source of income. They had nothing to lean back on. They, got a subsidy from the government, which was nice, but that only lasts a certain amount of time. And that may be a huge pay cut than what you're used to. And their lifestyle inflation may be massive. They may be living above their means. And so they just felt that pain. And I was fortunate. I was able to maintain work through the time, but not a single second of the pandemic was I worried about losing my life, maybe except for a few things here or there that I would have cut out just for the sake of it. It wouldn't have changed one bit. And I wouldn't have had to change it for years to come if I really didn't want to. And that was only afforded by just taking that extra step. And you don't have to go to that extreme, but God, I wish people would just start that path and just become educated in that, in the slightest degree on their personal finances, especially in sales, because the power of earnings early on in your career and what you can do with that, especially when you're in your 20s and 30s, can be life-changing if you leverage it correctly.
That's so powerful, man, to even think about that. You're essentially just setting up a system that can weather any, negative event that might happen, right? No one could have ever predicted COVID, right? And let's just say you were in the, the restaurant industry or something that just got torched. You had no control over that. You might have lost a lot. You might have lost your job. But to have those multiple streams where you could still be making, or at least covering your expenses, if not even continuing to earn more and more money off of that, is just mind blowing, right? It's mind blowing to think that can be set up, and it's not rocket science either, right? It's just it sounds like, if I'm hearing from you, it's the discipline, right? It's first, it's probably the education, knowing that you can do that. Then it's the discipline. And then it's just actually following through on the plan, and then continuing to learn and grow.
And you could automate almost all of this.
Yeah.
So it's upfront work, maybe the first month to 3 months, maybe a little bit more. Where, okay, yeah, it's going to suck. You're going to learn some uncomfortable things about yourself and your spending habits.
Yeah.
But you're going to know that number, right? And the amount of people who don't even know what they spend on a monthly basis or a yearly basis is mind-boggling. And they don't know how close they are to collapse. And this equation, by the way, and I can't speak from personal experience, but I can speak for the experience of others who I've talked with. This changes exponentially once you have a family. Because it's not just you anymore, right? You have dependents, you have mortgage, you have these other things. But and people don't realize how close they are to collapse. It is shocking to me. And I think the one silver lining, and I know it's hard to say it coming out of the pandemic, was it really opened up a lot of people's eyes to the importance of saving, to investing. You're seeing all these crazy, projects coming out of like NFTs and crypto, and people talking about real estate side hustle. That side hustle culture is really on fire right now, which I think is awesome for people. And you're seeing a lot of it on LinkedIn. But even still, so many people don't realize how close they are. And even starting with, the cash flow and bringing in those streams of income and having your money work for you is the ultimate goal, right? Yeah. Investors pay the least taxes, all the good stuff. But some people don't even have an emergency fund. If something were to happen, they're screwed. And I think that's also crazy to me. And we were talking before the show, and I told you a stat I heard where if you have, and this may have changed slightly over the last year or two, but if you have a $0 or $1 net worth, you are already ahead of 20 to 25% of Americans right now.
Crazy. Just for having
crazy.
zero.
For having zero. just being at the starting line, being in the black,
Right.
you're ahead of 25% of Americans. And that is so terrifying. And obviously everybody has different circumstances and whatever, but a lot of people who I assume listen to your podcast, Tom, are on a good path. They're self-educating. They're probably in a decent career, or they're on a journey to a decent career in sales. And I think it's important to recognize that opportunity. The other big important thing, especially with sales, it's very cyclical. As you know, we all have good quarters. We all have bad quarters. We have good years, bad years. You've got to recognize that you have to take advantage of those years. I was like watching a podcast with T-Pain, of all people. If you remember T-Pain, flat broke.
Buy you a drink.
Flat broke. Yeah, exactly. Not anymore, because he's flat broke. So he's not buying anybody any drinks. But he talks about it. He's like, man, I always thought that the money would never stop coming. And, suddenly it stopped. Right. And I spent everything. I bought 4 houses. I bought 3 cars. And that's just honestly not far off than most people are thinking about their finances. And it's kind of scary. So I think just getting educated at the very basic level, starting to look at things like just building a budget, working off that budget, creeping up your savings to a level where you're comfortable, maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone, but still can live the life you want to live. It's not that hard. You don't have to make that big of a sacrifice. And then, starting to kind of build upon that foundation, build an emergency fund. Then you build a big investment account and start feeding that into that. And then that investment account is starting to grow upon itself. You have the wonders of compound interest. All that good stuff over time. But just that basic understanding of take control of your own finances, because no one is going to do it for you, I think is so important. And I'm always happy to talk to people about this or help people about this or tell them my path. But I think the importance, I couldn't state enough, of just taking that first step. If anybody's interested, Set for Life by Scott Trench, really, really good book on how to go from kind of 0 to 100 grand in terms of savings. And he talks about, actually, he's a sales manager, or was a big real estate guy now. And he talks about, I chose sales because I could control my income. And here's how I did it. He lays out a formula. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, unbelievable mental shift on how to think about money. Cash flow quadrant, same thing, how to think about money. So there's so many great resources out there. They're all free. And you just need to have that kind of aha moment and do the bare minimum. You take 3 months to kind of, have that little painful experience of learning your budget and working toward it and moving stuff around to get savings. And you automate everything else. You automate payments from your checking. The moment a check comes in, you put it into an investment account that could automatically invest in something, whatever fund you choose or whatever vehicle you choose. And you just set it up so it happens behind your back, so you don't have to worry about it or think about it every single month or twice a month, bare minimum.
Yep. So a couple great book recommendations that you just laid out. I would throw on top of that fire, Psychology of Money. I'd throw on top of that fire. This is a cheesy name, I know it, but it's a great book. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi.
Great book.
Maybe my favorite. It's top 3. For sure. A very basic book, but maybe just kind of teaching about like foundational levels, Richest Man in Babylon.
Great book.
And those would be the 3 that I would probably recommend to folks on top of that. So you've got a good little curriculum here.
Think and Grow Rich, another good one. Paper Money, another great one. That's more economic focused, but also very good. I mean, the resources are out there, no doubt.
Yeah. And I maybe just the last thing that I'll touch on here with you, Parker, is I actually saw someone post about this a couple weeks ago, saying that they set time in their calendar for learning. So let's say you're listening to this podcast, you're in sales, you don't know the first thing about personal finance. So now maybe you do, a little bit, and you want to kind of dedicate yourself to learning about this. I would highly recommend you grab 30 minutes, an hour with yourself. Put that on your calendar and say, hey, Wednesday afternoon, 5 to 6 or 4:30 to 5:30 or in the morning, I'm going to read about personal finance, or I'm going to listen to a podcast about it, or read a blog, or, learn a few different tips about how to create a budget, and that knowledge will compound over time. And the earlier that you can start, the better. And so I definitely recommend, taking that advice of set yourself up time for learning if you do want to learn about this.
Yeah. And like anything else, surround yourself with winning people and winning groups, put yourself in a position to win. So find podcasts, normally a lot of financial podcasts will have like mastermind groups that you could join. Some are paid, some are free, but there's a bunch of stuff. There's meetups, there's mastermind groups, there's all these things where you could get into the conversation, the dialogue with people who've been there, done that. They've experienced, amazing success with stuff like this.
Any finance podcasts you listen to, by the way?
Yeah, I listen to a bunch. So I'll pull up some of my favorites. But they tend to change. There's a few mainstays that I have that I really like. So I'm big on real estate, like I said. So there's a podcast, Cash Flow Connections. Mm-hmm. It's a real estate podcast. Hunter Thompson. He's a young guy down in Marina Del Rey. He's really great. There's one called The Corporate Investor. And that, as you imagine, is really tailored toward successful folks in the corporate world who want to learn how to invest their money. There is a podcast that I really like. It's mostly like a group of doctors and business owners, but Wealth Formula. Really interesting stuff. I like kind of the alternative, off the beaten path, kind of next level in your financial journey podcasts. Because that's where you really start. I mean, there's so many things out there that if you were to ask me 6 years ago, I would have never known any of this. But within a year or two, suddenly, my world's been opened up to all these different investment vehicles, whether they're insurance related, whether they're real estate related, how to kind of grow money within insurance accounts and then leverage that money tax-free to invest in real estate and all these other really crazy things that you can do once you start becoming sophisticated and educating yourself. And it changes your game. It changes the game for you for sure. So those are my favorite. They dig in a little bit deeper and they talk about some various topics. Most of them center around real estate and business. But I think good starting place for sure.
That's awesome. That's great. Anything, Parker, that we didn't get to? I know we covered a lot of ground around budgets, investing, kind of your formula, probably 24 resources there between books and podcasts between us both. And I hope this is helpful to the salespeople listening, but anything before we wrap up that we missed?
I'd say just nothing in particular. I think we covered a lot of ground. We didn't go too specific onto any one topic, but I think the overarching theme is just, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to figure out where to start, how to educate yourself. You're in a very good opportunity where most people, once you get to a certain point, you're paid, especially in sales, you're typically paid a base salary that's very livable. Everything on top of that, you should look at as opportunity. Not opportunity to buy a Porsche or a Rolex. I had a guy the other day who had a killer year. I mean, good on him. He smashed it out of the park. But before the commission checks were even cut, I saw this guy at a meetup and he had his new Rolex. And I was just like, nice, man. Did you just get that watch? He's like, yeah, just bought it, brand new Rolex. I'm like, dude, you haven't even gotten your commission check yet. He's like, yeah, but it's coming. That kind of mentality, guys. I mean, it's just, you buy the cool thing, treat yourself for sure, but recognize that those checks is an opportunity to do something big. Get involved. Look at find some people on LinkedIn who are doing cool things with money. Jennifer Welsh, Justin Welsh's wife, has some great basic entry-level advice. Max Pashman, same thing. Those are great folks to follow. But just start somewhere and protect your future financially. I mean, start the faster you start, the faster. I mean, if you start in your 20s and you're doing well in sales, you could be a millionaire before you know it, and you're way ahead of the game at that point.
Yeah, that's inspiring. Parker, I appreciate you educating us firing us up. I'm ready to not only close some deals this month, but take that hard-earned commission and put it to work. So appreciate you coming on. We'll have to do another episode again soon.
Of course, anytime, man. It's always a pleasure.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for checking out that podcast. Happy July to you. Would love if you took 22 seconds and hit subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, your favorite podcast player. And be sure to check out some of my content on LinkedIn. I'm Tom Malemo. And on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Tommy Tahoe. Have a great day. Make it legendary. Peace.